We're live. We did it.
Hello.
We're back. We're doing this thing again. We did not do it last month, and we won't be doing it again next month. But Here we are this month. Hi, hello. I'm Nicole Sweeney. This is my YouTube channel that you're on. How do we start this? I make educational YouTube videos for a living, and I have a background in sociology and communications, and that's, in theory, what I was supposed to be, the kinds of nonfiction books I was supposed to be picking, but I have gone out of my way to create chaos.
I think we've just decided to embrace the chaos of nonfiction at this point. I'm Deboki, and I am a science writer, and that's what I do. I guess usually then when we're on my channel, we usually also will talk about science stuff, but not always, because again, we have just gone with whatever book we want to read or has been on our bookshelf for too long, because that's what happens a lot of times. I feel like especially with nonfiction, like you get it because you're like, I want to read it, but like it's so easy to just have it sit there unread. So that's why this exists.
Well, and also it's so easy to have it sit there unread, and also it's like most of it is stuff that I'm like, this would be better if I were able to talk to somebody about it instead of just like reading it myself and sitting alone thinking about this book that I read. Anyway, so today we are talking about this book, The Stonewall Reader, by the New York Public Library, edited by the assembled by the New York Public Library. I don't know. When I was making the title for this, I was like, I guess that's what I put. I guess that's who we put as the author here.
Every time I've been like drafting the newsletter or like in my own like reading records, I like to like keep track of authors and stuff. I'm like, who do I say this is? I mean, I guess the library. The library wrote it.
In all the places where you can find this book listed, that's what they put in the author section, is the New York Public Library. So that's what we're gonna go with.
I also feel like they did such a good job with the packaging for I know this is not the point of nonfiction book club, but I just like really feel like this is like one of the like best looking books like we've had, where like the inside cover, like I didn't look at the inside cover for a while, and then like one day I was like, oh right, let's peek, and then I was like, oh shit, like that's amazing, like that's perfect, like going like into like photo, and then also like the nice outer cover, I guess.
Yes. I love the outer cover. It was not until like I took it off to read it and like looked at this cover that it dawned on me, like, oh, like all of the reader books that I had to buy in college, like that. I didn't make that connection. I really had very little concept of what this book was. I'm going to be honest with you. I really did not know what. I was just like this. I bought it on like recommendation from several people, and then forgot about it, and it was sitting on my shelf for a really long time, and then picked it for this. So what this is the New York Public Library has these are excerpts of like a larger sort of queer archive, I guess. I don't and they gathered together this collection of written material. So it's a mixture of like excerpts from fiction, nonfiction, mostly nonfiction. And interview transcripts. Actually, the audiobook is really cool because for a lot of those interviews, it's the actual audio of the interviews. And so, and like it includes stuff it confused me a little bit because I was reading along, and like there are parts that I guess are like redacted from the transcript that the audio but they included in the audio section. So some of the interviews I was like, I can't, it's like actively distracting because of, like they edit it to make it more readable, but there's more I don't know, like sometimes like the questions, like they organize the thoughts, and here's a paragraph and then here's a question, and that's like not how the conversation was actively flowing. So I had to like set the physical book down while I would during most of the interviews because it was too hard to follow that way, but it was really cool. So yeah, mixture of things all around like Stonewall, like I mean, like queer history in general, but like sort of centered on Stonewall. And like the book is broken up into 3 sections of stuff before, like, so the event itself, and then after. And yeah, that's anything else that's important about describing what this book is?
I guess like along those lines, also it's like a bunch of like different types of primary sources. Like some things are articles, some things, like you said, are interviews, some things are like, I think there's some testimony kind of stuff. So it's like very much like a mixture of different things. And also, I think an important part of it is it's presented with very little commentary, which they also kind of address up front. They're like, our goal is not to like dispute the veracity of anything in here or to provide commentary, even though the way it's structured, there is inherently kind of like a dialogue between different sections. But they present it very much with just like a little bit of an introduction on just like who the person is we're about to hear from and like what the thing we're about to read is sort of loosely gonna refer to, even if it's like a specific event or specific ideas, and then just kind of presents it just straightforwardly. Here is the text of whatever the thing is.
Yes, that's a much better description. I was like, I don't know how describe this book. I took the fewest like notes, like didn't like mark anything, just because I was like, oh, this is like not that kind of thing. Like it feels like there's a something about the totality of it. This like full collection of things that makes any of sort of like the standout like lines or thoughts or ideas or whatever feel less essential than they have felt in our previous nonfiction book clubs, in part because there are effectively so many authors. And so there's this sense of like, actually the thing is all the things together. Like it's all of those ideas and experiences cumulatively. And so like any individual, I don't know, excerpt or whatever would feel really, really reductive, which I mean, I guess that's always true. That's always the case, but like more so here.
Yeah, I think it's like an interesting part of the reading experience too. Like, I like that you brought that up, because one of the things I was thinking about, like compared to what we usually talk about, and also how I kind of usually approach reading nonfiction in any kind of form, not just books, but like, you know, essays or whatever online. Like I really love analysis. Like I super love reading people's like, not all takes, but many takes are like, you know, that's like what I'm like really interested in, is seeing people like make, you know, kind of get to the second step of like, I've read this primary source, now how are we going to piece these things together? But it was also really great reading this without doing that. Like I didn't realize like how much I've just gotten in the mode of expecting everything to be commented on, and like actually just sitting down and just like engaging with just like, okay, this is like a testament of like a certain time and a certain community and a certain individual's experience, and that, which doesn't mean I have to like everything in it or anything, but like just like kind of engaging with that sort of like without any other barrier is something that would have usually bothered me. And like usually I'm like, yes, you have to give context, but I actually really enjoyed this in the state that it was, of just like, especially like I don't know that much queer history, so like sitting down with just like a variety of different things felt like very good. I guess just to be able to get like a little bit of like a variety of different perspectives and told in different ways.
Yeah, yes, a very broad range of perspectives, and in ways that they are often perspectives that are often like directly kind of combative with one another, even though like none of these things were actively like written to be assembled in this way. There's definitely a fair bit of like, you know, this thing meant this to me, followed by somebody else being like, this did not mean that, this meant something else. As you know, just sort of like a very like, I don't know, trifling kind of insignificant example, or I guess not, whatever, as a small example of a phenomenon that like exists throughout the book. The first thing that comes to mind, but is like Judy Garland. Like there's like
Yep.
two back-to-back excerpts where one who's like, we were all like young and like, I don't know why everybody thinks this is about Judy Garland. I didn't give a shit about Judy Garland.
Yep.
And then like the next one is like, I was so fucking sad about Judy Garland. And like, just, you know, but like as sort of, I don't know, representing like a movement and like a broad, like part of the point is this is like a really broad range of people and experiences and like the ways in which, I don't know, you have moments like this that serve as kind of flashpoints and that like they're, in spite of this like maybe disparate positioning beforehand, there's much like a greater sense of like, well, now, I don't know, it's a, the ways in which this like created a moment of community as well, which I thought was really, really interesting. It's like, that's like a whole other direction. The thing I was actually, sorry, I had like two sort of separate thoughts there. And that's like, I want to put a pin in that because the other thing that I think while we're talking about sort of like the scope, the total scope of the project, I think is really, really interesting, is so I said beforehand that I knew very little about what this book was. I knew just enough to know that there was going to be some like nonfiction in it. It was actually very, very little, but like I knew that was like part of it. And so I was sort of confused as to what I was like, or sorry, there was going to be some fiction. Sorry, I said that backwards. But yes, it is mostly nonfiction. There are a couple excerpts from fictional works, and I was like, but everything that I'm seeing is listing this as nonfiction, and like that is I see now that that's definitely the correct classification for it. But I also think that there is I think that is also something that is like really interesting in terms of the large project of this book, like this idea of like fiction as nonfiction, like fiction as essential truth, particularly in spaces of like identity work. Like I think that is and spaces of identity work, and also so much like there are a lot of sort of like pervasive themes running across all of this, but there's a lot of like discussion about how we like name and frame things. And so I think that like, I don't know, the inclusion of fiction as well in that mix, I think is really interesting and like adds a lot to just like what this book is doing.
I feel really bad because as soon as you said that, my head jumped to the current state of the cat person discourse.
Oh
yeah, there's always room for more cat person discourse. But I was thinking about because like I think one of the reasons why that is a work of fiction that took off in part because it reflected very strongly on like a specific sort of like identity related thing, like the experience in the case of that story of being a woman dating a man who like you have like these weird issues with that like you can't quite name in a certain way as a violation, but that like you feel that and especially like like people have pointed out like that came out during the Me Too like kind of surge of stuff, and I think that is a work of fiction that very much reflects on a real thing, and that's why the first round of that short story like hit so hard, and I think it's why this second round of the follow-up where like one woman was like, hey, turns out I realized that this short story that very strongly resembled parts of my life is actually based on parts of my life. Not all of it, but like definitely some key details were taken from my life. Like I think that's like why the discourse around that has like been so weird, because everyone is like in this weird fraught space of like it's a fiction story that like all fiction's probably going to draw on something real, like not even just like real like issues, but also just like details from like life. But like when we are using fiction to like in this sort of auto fiction or like this sort of kind of blurry sort of way where it reflects something deeper, like both for the reader and the writer, like that line gets I don't think there's an answer. I just think it's like why everyone is like,
Yes.
I know what the cat person essay means. Like, sorry, I hate to make this about cat person when it is like about a different thing. But I just like when you said that, I was like, oh, I have a new point that I am now thinking of.
In the cat person, well, you know, it's because it's been so inescapable the last few days. So the brain defaults back to what is familiar.
No, but I do think like that was just interesting to bring, because I kind of like I'd read a big chunk of this book like last month and then like put it down when we were like kind of rearranging our schedule and then picked it back up, and so I was like flipping through today and I kind of had forgotten about some of the fiction parts, but like I think you're totally right where it's like it's interesting situating that with a lot of nonfiction, just kind of like taking it I don't know, like on the same terms in some ways as you would take the nonfiction parts, again because there's not really much else presented to like connect them, like you sort of treat them with the same weight.
Yes. Well, and also like when, you know, there is, because I'm pretty sure it's only in the first section, maybe not, maybe there's some later. I'm pretty sure it only crops up in the like the before, and so there's also something there too about just like the when part of what is at issue is an inability to like live one's life openly, like be oneself openly. Like there's also something I think to the idea of like fictionalizing, like in particular when you're talking like history, and you know I think that's also part of another point of this work's existence, is sort of the ways in which history gets erased or not told when the people that it is about are not also in power, so then even within marginal, within like a marginalized group too, there are like further like layers of the ways in which history gets written, rewritten, whatever, in accordance with power, basically.
Yeah, I thought one of the kind of recurring lines that would get brought up through the book that like stood out to me was like everyone being like, this new generation doesn't know what we did, or like that they don't know the history, and like that seems so tied with like kind of the objective of this book overall. And it's like also like funny to think about now, because I feel like now like there's sort of like that millennial Gen Z tension is like you kind of see like a similar sort of refrain of like even like a decade ago, like we saw like gay marriage. Like I remember when like Prop 8 was in contention in California and didn't pass, like, and then later like and the before and the after of that, and obviously like it's a lot of like younger generation saw that too, but from a younger age, and so the experience of it, like that's not to invalidate, it's like the experience of it is different, and so it's interesting to see that like and now like thinking about the things that I thought when I was younger and now how I think about them when I was older, and like seeing the things that it's more just like I didn't know what existed when we talk about stuff like identity. Like it's easy to think like, oh, like as an Indian American or something, like we just didn't exist, but actually like learning more about Asian American history, it's like, oh, like no, we did exist. It's just that like it's not like this part of how we understand or learn about like this country's history. So it's like this weird double thing, because on the one hand, it's like, it's so easy to be mad at like the young people for not knowing, but it's also like there's a real reason for it.
Yes. Yeah. It's like the how, how would they have known is sort of, I think, a big part of it, when like it's not it is history that is not like not being presented. So, and I mean, it's also this book doesn't quite get it, like stops short of this moment in time, but like also if we're going to talk about like younger, whether the younger generations, whether it be the millennials or the Gen Z, but like younger queers not knowing our history, like they're many of them many queer elders died. So like this is the book stops just short of AIDS and that, what that, the impact that had on queer communities. So like I don't know. Yeah, there are so many layers to like the suggestion of like, why don't the youth know the history? And well, first of all, who would teach it to them is really like the big thing. And it's like not my high school in Jefferson City, Missouri. Let me tell you, that is not where I was going to learn all of this information. No, that's where I was closeted and sad. So anyway, boop, 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 boop. Yes. Everyone is always mad at the next generation for not knowing things. We did that. I guess then the respectability politics too, I think, is also kind of ties into this too, because like there's a chapter, and I forget which one it is, but that sort of engages with this a little bit, but like about the ways in which like rejecting a lot of those ideas while also understanding like why people who came before them like why it mattered, so like why that was important, like why assimilation, whatever, like why that was so essential, but also like I think that there's a way in which that like feeds back into this thing that we were just talking about like why history is not necessarily preserved too, because like you first have to get to this point where like you can be like open, like open, like active and present before you can also be an effective documentarian, I guess.
I thought that was also like sort of an interesting part of the history aspect of it, like was how they sort of kind of like in the first few chapters, I'm totally getting a lot of this wrong now in my memory, but just sort of the framing of like this, there was sort of this tension, it seemed like in the first section of like whether the goal is to address like something in your relationship to yourself or to address like the relationship of the law to the individual, and like this sort of not like a tension between those things, but sort of like figuring out where different people's priorities are gonna like go. Because I think one of the chapters I remember reading from that first section was like and it's like alluded to again, was like Franklin Kameni's, I don't know if that's how his last name is pronounced, but he was an astronomer who had been like, he had lost his government job because he was gay, and then like was making like he had like this his chapter is like a section addressed to JFK about like why this is bad, and like it's very much like oriented around like, hey, we're good, let us do our jobs kind of thing, and like these like, and I understand that framing, but it's like against like some of the other chapters too, where you're sort of like, okay, there's this weirdness of like, well, like, is this, and I think this is like such a messy part of these kinds of like conversations overall, because it's like, that is like true. It's also like, is that like, what is the condition of equality that you're like getting if it has to be so conditional on being like good or being like exceptional or whatever? I thought that was, and that like his name like kind of threaded through the rest of the book, because it was interesting because he was very activist, so it's like kind of interesting seeing like his name pop up in other chapters and like how his work impacted other people. In
general, the seeing a lot of like the recurring names that was very interesting and cool, and it gave it an almost like, I don't know, novel-esque feel, because you're like, oh yeah, I remember that character.
My buddy.
Also, this is not the point of that, but that to the point that you made earlier about just like the range of primary sources, like the fact that it also included like letters to presidents, like really broad range of ways in which of like, you know, ways of approaching like this problem, right? And that, you know, going back to like the question of like respectability and like and how making your humanity contingent in that way. And I think, and it's interesting because the book doesn't actively contextualize anything. So like that's not it. The book doesn't actively say, okay, but here's the problem with this approach. But later in the book, there is something in the structure of like that happens that's like fairly early. But then like as you move through the book, you start to get more and more people basically doing like, you know, saying like this is not this is untenable. Like this version, this version of liberation or whatever is not liberation, and it is like this is not going to work. This is not enough. This is I reject these conditions. And so that I think that's also interesting about like the ways in which you can say curation is speech. That like even though they are not actively contextualizing things, there is still the selection itself, and the ordering of the selection does like inherently contextualize things in certain ways. And I think like it's interesting too because of the ways in which sometimes stuff will I always felt like when there was something sort of contradictory, the one that came second was more persuasive to me, if that makes sense. Like, and I
know what you mean.
And I'm curious about, I don't know, just that as like as a from the curation standpoint.
Yeah,
I don't know. That's the end of my thought.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like it's clear they put a lot of thought into like how they were going to order things, and also what they were selecting, what they were going to open with, what they were going to close with felt very deliberate. Like those were two pieces that called directly to each other. And so like, I thought all that was like really, really fascinating to me. And I'm like, I want to see their board of like index cards or whatever, however it is, they like the library, the people at the library, are miracle workers at the library. Like, how did they do, like, what was their process? And I want to see what the different orders are. And I almost wish I could read like the alternate versions of this book and see what sections would land differently. And like what threads would be like more apparent or less apparent, depending on, just like what the structure, and like also were there other approaches to structuring, because this is like a clear timeline, which I thought was like really interesting too. I thought that was like a very well done part of it. I liked the before, during, after, because I felt like it did a really, like, especially for something like Stonewall, where it's like part of the event is that it's like chaotic, and so like having a lot of different perspectives and really like dwelling in it is like super good, and like help them kind of highlight like, hey, this is like what the bar scene was like, this is like what going out with like your friends or like your partner or whatever, this is what it's like this is, or like not even your partner, like just like whoever you want to like hook up with, like it's just like you can't even, like the things that like if you're straight and you're going out to a bar you can take for granted, like, you know, this is not what that was like, and so there, and like you might get arrested, right, like that kind of thing, just like really illustrating that scene, like in the, like giving that history for it, and giving, well, not even history, like giving that sense of like a present day reality for it, before kind of diving into like what happened. I like really, I just thought that was very good.
I found it to be a very like helpful way to be led through the selections, and I to your point, like would be really curious to see what other ideas they had for how to order this thing, and again, like what, I don't know, what other things they may be considered including in different sections and before landing at this particular selection of things. I also the thing you were saying about like it's chaotic, that was one of the other things that I thought was so great about the during section, is that like having so many different firsthand accounts coming from all of these different like places, I think did a really good job of making that clear, because it's like, you know, so I was like I was a reporter who was with the police, and I was in the bar. I was on my way there. We had gone to, I was at another bar, and I was walking over, and there were people were already in the street by the time I got there, like whatever, like that, like mixture of things made it feel much more like ground level, like and grounded, in a way that I really, really appreciated.
Yeah, I agree. And I think like giving the before and after too was like, it's also interesting because it is sort of part of that generational kind of story too, like because you sort of have that like before and after like, I'm sorry, I'm like really hung up on the generational thing. I think I'm just like thinking about it a lot lately. Because I'm getting old.
It's personal.
I have like no real like generations are both real and not real. I know it's like kind of a little bit arbitrary, but I just like have been really like fascinated by like the way things like shift like as you go from younger to older, and like how these things like that are very energizing in a certain way when you're younger are like energizing in a different way when you're older. Like kind of the sense of like responsibility and gratitude, and like, or just the entire notion of gratitude is a thing that I like find like interesting in these conversations about like, just making things more diverse, making things better, what it is like we're supposed to be grateful for, because there's always something that like the previous generation is going to miss. Like there's something they're going to get like wrong, or something that's going to make some things worse, even if they're making other things better. And so I think that's one of the reasons why I find it like that's part of why like that Frank Kameni's chapter kind of stuck with me, because I see it so much as like this like obvious thing that like if you're like you might think if you're like kind of trying to build this like movement from like the beginning, like that this might be the smart way to go. And then like downstream decades later, like it's like on the one hand, like what he did probably like was like, or not probably, like definitely did make a huge difference, but also like there's always going to be something about it that is going to be lacking. Like that's, I feel like sort of the nature of trying to make the world a better place is like you're always going to not make it better in some way, and figuring out that like, okay, like next generation's job is supposed to be to figure out what next, and you know, what is the notion of gratitude in that sense, I guess. Like what is it that we think we owe our previous generations?
Well, and especially because it's like with the Kameni example, where you have like the sort of, I don't know, reductive version of like accept us because look, we're just like you and normal and whatever. But like even in context too, you have like large swaths of people who are like, that wasn't for me. Like I was there at the same time, and I was not part of what they were fighting for. They, you know, that movement, whatever, like ways in which aspects of these movements were in real time leaving people behind, and like their own sense of like, I don't know, like I feel incredibly excluded and left out. And like that also comes up in terms of the ways in which the book talks about activism in general, and how like, you know, the most aggressive actions were taken by the people with the least to lose. And like, and I think that, I don't know, that is also a thing that like sat with me a lot while reading this, is, you know, the ways in which like again, circling back on this sort of assimilation-y point, but like the more successfully you are able to do that, the closer the greater your access to that, whatever that looks like it disincentivizes you from the kinds of like, you know, burn shit down actions that would benefit the most people, I guess. Because
there was like a pretty like solid string of chapters where it felt like I don't know if I'm remembering this correctly. I think like one person was maybe talking about how they would like go to another city to protest so they wouldn't be recognized, and like all that is like very much tied to that sense of like, I like if you have something to lose, like there's something to lose, and that like changes the stakes of like what you're protesting and how you're protesting. Yeah.
That one was really interesting too, because she, I believe she was on the cover of the Ladder. It was like the interview. She like addresses it head on in that interview too, that she's like, I'm doing this because like right now that is like all I feel like ready to do. But you know, at some point I will say, like, fuck it. That like the cost at a certain point, this cost will become too great. But I'm not there yet. And I thought that was also interesting too, because it is not as simple as like, yes, no, like it's not a clean, I don't know, like it's complicated, you know, just the kinds of personal decisions that you have to make. And so that like the spectrum too, because it's also, even in that example, it's not like, oh, I'm not like, you know, participating in the pickets. Like I just am not ready to do it here in the city where I live. I have to go to some other city, and whatever. The spectrum on which that activism can exist.
Yep.
You have a note in here about the reporter, which I mentioned the reporter chapter.
Oh yeah. So I think it was like Howard Smith. Sorry, I put very smart. I put the page number in the notes, so I knew what was going to happen, which is I was going to forget where it would be. So one of the chapters, like from the during Stonewall riot, is from a journalist who's like inside of Stonewall, like shadowing the police, and then like just basically ended up being the only reporter inside the bar, like when things were happening. And there were like a lot of like, I've been just like seeing more over like the past years, like people have been like discussing the ways that reporters and like media kind of enable police brutality and police narratives. There are like just a lot of things where I remember like I like, this was the one of the few chapters where I really kind of like have notes in the margins, because I was like, this is like against that backdrop of now of like what I've been trying to like be more aware of, like stuff stands out. Like there's like one sentence who says a kind of tribal adrenaline rush bolsters all of us, which is like a very like small thing, but like that kind of immediate identifying of like there's an us. And then like says before, this kind of crowd freaks easily, like kind of taking on that very like othering language. There's like according to the police, they are not picking on homosexuals, like very, you know, just kind of taking the police narrative and like not really challenging it. Like they said, according to the police, they are not picking on homosexuals. On these raids, they almost never arrest customers, only people working there.
Which like the surrounding chapters, you know, openly dispute. They're like, no, we get picked up all the time. Like that's just like a known, and the ease with which this reporter just
and I don't think the reporter is like trying to be like cop propaganda. Like I actually don't think that's what they think they're doing at all. It's like just like that thing where it's easy when you are shadowing a certain group to like adopt that language, and especially for police where they are in this position of authority and like seem to have a certain level of like, I don't know what the right word is, but you're supposed to, you know, you grow up, you're supposed to trust the police or whatever, like that kind of sense about them, where I was like, oh, that's like, that just stuck out to me.
Yeah, well, and there's certain things about the way that is written that are like make you feel as though like this man would probably bristle at the suggestion of like what, like, you know, whatever that's what he's doing, because like there are places where like when I forget his name, but the guy that the cops dragged in and like beat up and then charged with assaulting an officer, like that whole, like that the reporter is portraying that as like, this is like, here's what happened. They dragged this guy in, they beat the shit out of him, and then decided that they were going to charge this guy with assaulting them. Like that you know, that was the theory, whatever. And like they were taking all their whatever. That like that's there. But like even with that, like even with seeing that happen, this reporter still cites, without questioning, the police insistence that they never arrest customers. They only arrest the people who are working there. Just the ways in which institutional people interface with one another. I think that they're like, lately, obviously, we are definitely spending more time like thinking about the ways in which reporters engage with police, but like there's also within this book, like there are also questions about like institutional people engaging with other institutional people. And again, this sort of goes back to, you know, the like assimilation stuff and like what, you know, what are the conditions for inclusion and whatever, that I think, you're also seeing that stuff play out in the way in which that story was written.
Yeah. I think the one less, like for me at least, like that's less of a like, I don't know, judging the past or kind of note is like one of the threads that I like found, I don't know, I just liked because like it like popped up in different ways, was like how people build community. There's these examples like from early of like, you know, these magazines and stuff, and then Stonewall itself is almost sort of like a community endeavor where like a thing happens that on one hand, like when it starts is like not really, like it doesn't stand out that much, like it's not that unusual, except like people like realize that there is like just the nature of the circumstances made it so they could like build on it, and actually like there were people who were saying like we saw this as an opportunity, like, and there's sort of a community aspect to that, even if it's not like consciously like one community, like a named group of people, like a coalition or something coming together. It's like different groups of people coming together and seeing this kind of like opportunity to build this thing into like an actual moment, and like being very conscious of that, which I thought was just really interesting. Like like we described it as chaotic, but like it in some ways it's both chaotic and planned isn't the right word, but like deliberate. Like there's a deliberateness to it, which I thought was really, I like the way that they presented that, because it like made me think more about like kind of just, I don't know, like when we talk about Stonewall, like in cultural, just like casual reference, like just like, I don't know, at the most superficial level of like how I've seen it kind of described in media, it kind of just sounds like, you know, riots happen. But like this is like the actual, the planning and the work, and not even the planning, like the things that have been built upon for decades to make it so that when this moment happens, people can just like gather and immediately make something of it.
Yeah, I mean, community in general, like community building, is definitely another one of the like the big through lines of the book. Like it's a thing that that, you know, kind of that comes up in almost every one of these excerpts in some form or another. You know, like in, whether it be in sort of the early chapters of like the sense of how like the community being sort of transformative from like going from a place of like I suddenly can like accept my own existence and first to like later still transformative, but then the kinds of sort of like, you know, activist transformations of community and sort of the ways in which like community is defined differently too, like the sense of you know, efforts to create community on one in one way were like also potentially exclusionary too. Like there's, you know, a fair bit of you know, both like racism and sexism within the so many of the different communities too. And so there's like, I don't know, both community. There's a lot. There are a ton of discussions of like community and what community means. So much so that like you actually can't have just like one conversation about like what the book is saying about community. It's actually like it's saying like 100 different things about about community
totally.
and how community works.
Which makes sense. Community is complicated.
Right. Yes.
Once you put human interaction into it,
Right.
it all gets
Humans.
yeah.
Classic.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't know what next. What else?
So yeah, I don't know. It's like it's such an interesting book to talk about because it's like, again, this is like where like I think when we talk about like books that have the analysis, it's so easy to be like, we're gonna engage with the analysis, and this one is like, it's so many different things at once, and I really like it, and yet I am like figuring out how to talk about it.
Because we are tasked with the analysis ourselves. Ugh.
Yeah.
Oh,
no.
Oh no.
Why did we do this to ourselves? No, but I'm like, also it's good. It's good.
Yes.
It's good to have the experience. Yeah. Because I think the like one of those threads, like we were saying, of community is both like that it is a very like unifying thing, but also like such a forming a community can at times also mean defining who is not in the community. And so that, but then that also like one of the threads, and especially I think again, this like connected the first and second chapter really well, is like, okay, like we're still going to find our people. Like the people are still there. It's harder and it's, you're like, that doesn't make it okay. That doesn't make like the exclusion okay. But that like that is just like an inherent condition of like being a person. It's like finding your people and also like figuring out like how to survive together.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, and I feel like that is the sort of the like most hopeful recurring sort of message, I think. Throughout all of them is that idea.
Yeah, I guess I'm now that I'm like thinking about the racism angle, I'm just remembering also like going back to Kamini because apparently his chapter made the most impact on me. Was him, and I don't know why. Well, okay, actually, I kind of do why, because I think his was another section that I like was one of the few where I took notes. Was like, and this is like a thing that comes up too, is like he says like Black people are met at worst with merely indifference, and I was like, Rufus,
yes,
in 1961.
Yes. Yes, I forgot because I did not take notes. But yes, yeah, his description of like their movement's going great, and it's much better than the problems I'm facing as a white gay man. It's really something. really quite a choice. Yeah, and yes, that having the various different ways that people navigate. I think the book is that's another way in which like the book is well structured, in that like because they are not like they're not adding commentary, so there's no place for like the editor to say like, you know, footnote. The fuck? But like there are ways in which sort of the structure is like it is situated or like within other texts that you're like, okay, like, you know, calm down there, guy. I think that's the ways in which you achieve commentary through curation, I guess.
He wrote, I can close in no better fashion than by quoting Thomas Jefferson, and I wrote, can you though?
You can in no better fashion than by quoting Thomas Jefferson. My guy.
That's okay. I mean, who among us has not thought to end a letter with Thomas Jefferson? Sorry, I don't mean to be picking on someone who clearly has like done a lot more for the world than I am. Like, I just can't.
You know, it is a necessary, I don't know, like consequence. It's an inevitable consequence of like reading from where we are versus, you know, the place from which he was writing. From the chat related to defining community, the excerpts that talked about the medicalization of homosexuality as an illness was interesting, and how today we still rely on doctors to diagnose whether someone is trans enough to get surgeries, and how a lot of what people are going through is still happening. Yes. Yes. And like you see that in the book too, just in terms of like the different levels of you know, like who is winning, who is like the victories such as they are, like who is actually like really, you know, winning from those moments, and the, I don't know, the very like slow pace of progress when you do not get to be included in the umbrella of that progress, you know. But like yes, the bit about the medicalization was really was yes.
One of the chapters at the end that I also like was just like talking over you, because now I'm like remembering this chapter that I thought was really fascinating, and I did not know what page it was on, but was the guy who was a psychologist or psychiatrist and testified, and like wore like a disguised his voice to testify, like to, here it is, John E. Fryer, MD, speaking to the American Psychiatric Association, and he was just like, I really need to do this, like I really need to testify so you guys can like understand, like this was like a testimony that apparently helped to like make people stop treating homosexuality as a mental illness, is how they contextualize it in the book. And there's just like a lot of really interesting parts of it where he's talking about this tension from both like the psychiatric community, and also like from like he and his like fellow gay psychiatrists, where he's like, yeah, like, you know, like a lot of gay people just don't trust us, like for understandable reasons. Like they've not had good experiences, or like don't trust the like psychiatric community. And I just thought, I thought that was just like a very, I don't know. I hate using words like interesting to describe this, because it's like such a like a hard thing. But yeah, I just found that very interesting to read, I guess. Compelling. Yeah. That is the right word. I like it. He like at one point is like calling out like other psychiatrists who use slurs, and this like says like, show a little creative ingenuity, and I just really liked that. Like, yeah.
You can be an asshole, at least be like clever about it. Like, come on.
Yep. Yeah. And I think like this actually reminded me also of the gene, because in the gene he talks about the search for the gay gene, and it's like such a weird tension of like understanding biological things underlying other things, whatever that is, but also like, what is it that we use that knowledge for, and like, does it mean anything? Like, would the existence of a gene mean something if we're like living in a society that's just like, hey, like the phenotype, the whatever, like your sexuality, like as long as everyone's consenting and like, you know, of age, like what is the issue, right? Or like, you know, like what's the point of treating something that like what is the whole point? Like, what is the idea of treatment? And I think it's like Colby is saying, like that like becomes something else entirely too when it comes to like trans identity and like relationship to your body and stuff. So it's like this the step of like a regulation or something. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, the requirement that we like pathologize things to
Defining a normal.
Yes. Another nonfiction book club favorite. Really, what's normal, defining normals and baselines, and all of that.
Yeah.
There we go. We got back on our way, made our way back to a classic.
We didn't talk about systems today.
No.
So we're gonna talk about normal. Yeah. But the system still sucks, so it's okay.
Well, on that note, I guess unless do you have anything else, or should we do next book?
Yeah, and if you guys want to ask,
there's anything else in the chat,
or give any other ideas,
other thoughts, notes.
Like I said, this is like a very like it's like a weird book to like process like out loud in some ways, but I think also is better to process out loud.
Yes. Were our thoughts always coherent? No, but they
got there.
We got there, and I don't think that I could have done it any other way than. So yeah. So our next. Oh yeah, I was gonna check with you. Does that day work? Because that's the week after BookNet Fest, I think. It's after BookNet Fest.
After. I just want to make sure. We should have done this before.
Yep. No, but it does work. Yep. I'm good. I'll be here.
Yeah. Okay. So on September 10th, which we have now decided works for both of us, at 5 p.m. Eastern, on my channel, we will be talking about The Disordered Cosmos, Journey into Dark Matter, Space, Time, and Dreams Deferred by Chanda Pascal Weinstein. This is like a pretty new release. I think it was released a few months ago. And Caitlin actually brought this up on our nonfiction book club Discord. Dr. Chanda like tweets a lot about like racism and like sexism in science, and particularly like because she's a theoretical physicist, like I've learned stuff from reading stuff she's written about theoretical physics and like the weirdness of theoretical physics. So yeah, I think this is going to be a great one to talk about. I should actually put this so that's like visible. I think this will be pretty good to talk about as a group. So I'm really excited.
Yeah. Can't wait. Yeah. Well, we did it. We did a book club.
Yes.
And we'll see you again in 2 months. And then probably after that, we'll get back to monthly.
Yeah.
But, who can say?
Yeah. Time is weirder now than it was a year ago. So
time has not acquired any more meaning. So, that's where we're at. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you in 2 months, I guess.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.